Today we are going to be talking about a leadership characteristic of integrity and strength of character. And I'd like to introduce our guest speaker this morning. It's my honor and privilege to introduce Mr. Preston True. We welcome him to the 2012 Winter Circle Leadership Program. Let me tell you a little bit about his background. Mr. True was born in Chicago, Illinois. He is married with 2 children, both of whom attend Shrine Grade School. Mr. True was not Catholic. He was not raised Catholic, but he was confirmed in the church 4 years ago. And having committed to the Catholic faith as an adult, he is truly an inspiration in the manner in which he lives his faith and proclaims his faith. He lives by a simple and powerful model to love and serve. Mr. True graduated from Worcester University in Ohio with an English degree. He went on to hold positions in sales, marketing, management, in the banking industry, and in the corporate sector. It was through these professional experiences that he saw a need in the marketplace. He noticed that executives many times rose through the ranks due to their technical skills, but they didn't have the ability, nor were they prepared to be a manager or a leader. Be it a group of 10, a division of 100, or an entire organization of 1,000. So in 2005, he did something incredibly courageous. He started his own management consulting firm called True Leadership. He had both vision and courage to initiate this business and to follow his passion. Mr. True successfully launched his business by working with chief executive officers of small organizations, as well as becoming a respected executive coach working with Fortune 500 companies. Most notably, he worked with Wrigley Corporation, which operates in 40 countries and delivers its product to over 180 countries. Mr. True successfully grew his business for 7 years, until just recently he merged with Mark Kamen and Associates, a national consulting firm in Texas. He's entering a new chapter of his life because he had the courage to develop and execute his vision. I'm very excited to introduce to you someone for whom I have a tremendous amount of personal and professional respect, a professional that lives and teaches leadership to executives every day. Please help me welcome Mr. Preston True.
Note to self. Make sure I take Mr. Doman with me to introduce me everywhere I go. Good morning.
Good morning.
How good a morning is it really? 7:12, right? Well, I know you guys could be in lots of different places than here, and it's an absolute inspiration for me to know that all of you have made a commitment to be here to share with one another and to continue learning that, not just in the classroom, but outside as well. There are a few things I'd like to share with you this morning. As Mr. Doman and I spoke and we met before, he introduced me to the Winter Circle triangle of all the attributes or characteristics of leadership. And it was just a real inspiration to learn that all of you are in the midst of not just practicing that every day at school, in the classroom, or extracurricular activities, but you're doing so with one another, and especially doing it here early in the morning. So there are a few things I wanted to share with you this morning. I'm going to read from some notes, because if you get to know me a little bit better, I'll go off on lots of different tangents. I want to make sure to use our time most effectively. But there are 3 things I want to share with you about integrity. And of all the things that you could possibly consider or use as tools to leadership, I found that integrity for me has been the greatest foundation upon which to build lots of the other characteristics. So this morning I'm going to share a story about something that really happened to me 6 years ago. I'm going to distinguish what I mean by the word integrity. It's pretty straightforward, but there's some nuances to it. And I'm going to offer a few ideas on how we might use integrity in our own lives. I'm going to start off with one very brief story. Now, when Mr. Donan shared with me, or invited me a few months ago, he said, Preston, would you like to come to the Winner's Circle? I said, well, absolutely. I mean, who wouldn't want to do that? Who wouldn't want to be there? Now, you have to understand that I grew up in Chicago. And if you're not paying very close attention to the words that someone's using, you might misconstrue it for something else. Well, growing up in Chicago, when you hear Winner's Circle, it can frequently get confused for one of Chicago's greatest hot dog and hamburger joints called the Wiener Circle. If you haven't been, anytime you get a chance to go, to Clark and Wrightwood in Lincoln Park. Fabulous place. But after I started listening a little bit more, I realized, no, this isn't the Wiener Circle, as much fun as that is. This isn't Winner's Circle. This is about bringing a group of high school students together as a community to learn, to grow, and to develop with one another. So, a story about me 6 years ago. I had a wonderful opportunity, got invited to a company you guys may have heard of before. They make automobiles. To come talk to a gentleman about doing some executive development, some leadership development training. Well, I was really looking forward to this. This was a great opportunity. I just moved here from Chicago 2 years ago, and already I'm able to make my way into a very large organization to do some work. I was thinking, boy, if I could get a deal with Ford Motor Company in doing the work that I do, it would make a tremendous difference on a lot of different levels. Now, this is a bright, sunny morning. Anybody of you have, I'm sure all of you, many of you have been down in Florida to see that wonderful building in Dearborn. And that lobby of the older building where you look out, it's like all glass in that lobby. You look out. It's about 11:45 in the morning. I was waiting for a 12 o'clock appointment. I was imagining how this was just going to be the best possible project for me to get. Moving from Chicago, not knowing people, here I am at Ford. I am going to make the biggest difference I could possibly make. I'm going to tear it up at Ford. I've got all my leadership, skills and characteristics and tools in my toolbox. I'm going to come in and meet with them, and it's going to make all the difference in the world. So I meet this gentleman, Jack, about 6 foot tall, very nicely dressed. We have some small talk to share on the way to his office. And I'm thinking, this is playing out exactly like I wanted to play out. He's going to ask me a few questions. He's going to tell me about all the challenges and struggles that his leadership team is doing. And that I'm going to have all the answers. Well, the thing is, I've been preparing all night. So you can kind of imagine how he's feeling. Pretty confident at that point. Got everything, all my I's dotted, all my T's crossed. Been practicing all my answers to all those questions I knew he was going to ask me. Been practicing hundreds of times. So then I started sharing with him. He asked me what my methodology was. Well, methodology. Well, I typically start with an interview and get a feel for where the client is currently. And then I create a project plan to get the client into action. And we uncover some roadblocks to help them take that action in the right direction. And then we begin measuring how things are going from there. Just now, is that the most awkward silence you've experienced today? You can imagine the awkward silence that I experienced when Mr. Smith sat there and looked at me with almost no expression on his face. He asked another time, okay, well, what's your methodology? Did I miss something? Am I not hearing him correctly? I could barely remember 2 of the 15 steps I had on the notes in front of me, so I tossed out 2 or 3 more. He said to me, Preston, I understand what you do, but I need to know, what is your methodology? There had to be one of these around someplace. This was turning into the most humiliating experience of my life. Moments before, I had it all put together. I was going to come into Ford, make a huge difference, and here I am, not even able to answer a simple question. The ceiling had really begun to cave in on me. Here I was, you can imagine, right? To bring leadership development and training to a company, and I couldn't find my next words. I was simply not prepared. So, when Mr. Smith shifted around in his chair, I realized that I had a last chance. In a last-ditch effort to band-aid this situation, I asked myself, what support would I give a client who's faced with the exact same situation? It took just a fraction of a second, but what I did is I looked just over his left shoulder to a bookcase. All the books neatly lined up, but I saw that one title that jumped out in front of me. The Authentic Leader. Was that my life rack? I'm not sure, but there was really no place to go but open the situation. So I asked him, I said, Jack, can we check in for a moment? What are you noticing about this conversation? He replied, Preston, I really appreciate your concepts, and it's clear that you have a lot of great things to offer, but I would not put you in front of my executive leadership team. You know, they're process and methodology driven, and from the basis of our conversation now, they eat you up and spit you out. However, I would like to speak with you about another team. That's what I noticed about this conversation. Well, I was more convinced that when I asked that question, he was going to say, you know, the conversation's fine, thanks for coming in, and we'll talk with you later. But only one response came, and that was the one that he gave. What I realized was an invitation to actually get training and coaching in the moment, where the teacher became the student in a matter of a few moments. We shook hands, we walked back to the lobby, and I started contemplating some lessons. The first one, number 1, I pulled into the parking lot driving a Chevrolet. Not sure how that went before. And number 2, I had completely broken my word in being prepared for that conversation. I had completely broken my word. Not to Mr. Smith. He didn't know what I had prepared. But I had broken my word to myself about being as prepared as I could be for that. Now, for most of us, confronting a challenging situation is some of the most powerful teachers in life. And more specifically, in that moment, I had been confronted, or I was confronted, like no other time, with my current relationship with integrity. So, some of the things I'd like to share about that situation, that experience. 3 things. Number 1, always have a crystal clear vision of what success is all about. In other words, knowing your end game, whether it's in your classroom in a particular class, whether it's in sports or other extracurricular activities, or even in relationships. Being crystal clear is absolutely important. Number 2, even though things may get a little dicey, we've still got to be able to be willing to take those risks, to step out into the unknown, to actually get where we're wanting to go. then finally, my all-time favorite, because I am an expert in doing this, is I've got to be willing to clean up the messes that I make. And I make lots and lots of them. So, this lesson, this experience at Ford, was a life changer for me in a lot of different ways. It helped me shape who I am. It helped me operate my business differently. Helped me interact with others. Helps me raise my children. And more importantly, most importantly perhaps, how I manage myself. So looking back on this, that situation was probably the best example in my life where integrity is the foundation of which almost all values for me are founded. So, let's take a look at what integrity is, or what do I mean by integrity? Anyone want to have a definition? Definition starts at 7:30. Let's take the example of a wheel, all right? What do we notice about this wheel? Spokes, rims, black tire around. Let's say it's completely filled with the appropriate pounds per square inch of air. So in its perfect state, you might say, this wheel is whole, W-H-O-L-E, and complete. Whole and complete. In other words, the wheel is actually in integrity. I don't consider integrity to be anything more complicated than that. It's when the wheel, or the microphone, or the presentation, or the chairs in which you're sitting are whole and complete. They're in integrity. Now what happens if we have a slight change to that wheel? Now this one doesn't look like it'll work as well, right? In other words, the wholeness and completeness have changed to brokenness and incompleteness. Now, I don't know if this one would actually be usable, but we could certainly imagine that in a worst-case scenario, if we had nothing else to use to get from home to school on a Monday morning, we might put together, if that was the last wheel we had, we might try to use it. It might be workable, but the performance is going to be absolutely diminished. The performance is going to be absolutely diminished. Now, let's move away from bicycle tires for a moment. Now, we're human beings, right? We're not all round. We're not all perfect, although I still can try to convince my family that I'm as close to it as you can get. But access to integrity for us as human beings is through our words. It's through what comes out of our mouths. The words we use are absolutely critical. Like a bicycle tire that's whole and complete, our words can be the same. Now, let's take a look for a moment at what do I mean by when I say what is our word, or what are our words, because I'm going to put a little bit different spin on just the anything that could come out of our mouths. Consider that your word, the word that you give every day, the word you gave to Mr. Smith, Mr. Lomas, and Mr. Doman to show up here on Mondays for the Winner's Circle, is binding. In other words, one definition of what our word is what we say we're going to do and not do. Again, pretty straightforward. Another definition is what we know to do and know not to do. Might not be spoken, but we know it up here. Now this third one's going to be a little dicier. But the third way to look at our word is what we and others expect from us. Does anyone live with expectations in this room? Besides me? Absolutely. And expectations are ambiguous in many ways. They're a little fuzzy. But being our word actually takes into account our expectations and the expectations of others when we're taking action. And finally, fourthly, our willingness to actually be accountable for our words. So it's one thing to say something or to make a promise. It's another thing to actually follow it up with action. So, this morning, I'm going to invite all of you to consider something. You know yourselves to be who you are. The name that you were given, the parents that you have with you, the siblings, the friends, the extended family, you as students, you as athletes, and other activities in your life. You understand yourself to be that. I'm going to invite you to consider that, excuse me, oh, did I miss one? You're not just your name. You're not just the name that showed up on the birth certificate. Consider more than anything else who you are for yourself, who you are for others, who you are for this community are actually your words, the things that come out of your mouth. So, how does this work? Let's go through an example. Let's say you're doing really well in school. All right, I'll take math, probably my worst subject ever. But let's pretend I'm doing really well in school. And decide, you know what? I'm going to get into an AP class. Well, there's this thing I'll call low integrity. Low integrity hangs in the background. For most of us, integrity in general hangs in the background. But in this example, the only thing that's going through my mind right now is I want to be a little bit more challenged. Well, consider that at that moment, you're not really distinguishing integrity. In other words, you're not really being aware of it or noticing it. So you get into your AP math class and you start doing some work. And you start doing all right, but you realize, you know what? They call it AP, Advanced Placement, for a reason. It's tougher. And what's happening is I'm actually being held to higher standards of performance in this class. And let's say lots of other things going on. And I'm going to do enough to get by. That's fine. We're not going to make, it's probably not going to rock the boat that much as long as I can stick with it. But here's the thing. We went from living in a world where we didn't really notice integrity. We put ourselves into a situation called an AP class where all of a sudden we're held to account to higher standards. In other words, higher levels of integrity. And when we decide or we choose not to exercise those higher levels of integrity or follow up with them, we fall back down. Now there's something that someone shared with me called a bear trap. There's a bear trap effect to this. We might not see it, and you know what? Others might not be able to actually explain it to us. But when you consider what might be going through a teacher's mind, or even our mind, when we are doing pretty well in school, go to an AP class, decide, maybe not so much, I'm going to do the work to really excel. We come back to a lower level of integrity, people notice that. When you make a promise to a friend to do something and you don't, you might be able to clean up that mess without too much to worry about. But people notice that. It's the bear trap we step into that we don't always see. So, where does integrity, this thing called integrity, impact us? Sports. All the time it will happen in sports. I had a wonderful opportunity to interview a few of you in preparation for this morning. And one of the stories that was shared was a coach invited a team to go on practice. The coach was going to be about 30 minutes late to practice. Half the team actually got into action and organized themselves to practice. The other half of the team went goofing around, playing around, having a good time, right? That's what we all like to do. But what do you think happened when the coach got back and learned that half the team wasn't practicing? Those folks did a lot of running at the end of that practice. Where else does it impact us? Obviously the classroom. Now, for some of you, especially seniors, I'll pick on the seniors for a moment. It's the second semester of your last year in high school. It might be tempting to do the minimum to just get by. But what's the impact of taking it easy? You know, some of the things, I'm already in college. I've already got the college applications. You know, all my grades are in. Everything should be squared away. It's easy to skate by. But here's the question. What difference would it make if you actually gave 100%? You kept your word in your relationship to being a student. And then finally, for many of us, in some way, shape, or form, relationships. For any relationship to work out, consider there must be three things that always need to be present. Trust, credibility, and intimacy. And if we speak with integrity, our relationships, every single relationship, is going to work out a heck of a lot better than if we don't speak with integrity. So now, you know, Mr. True, there's some interesting ideas. Some of it's sinking in, some of it not. You know, still before 7:45 in the morning. But what can we do with this? Well, I've got two invitations for all of you to use some of these ideas. I'm hopeful that it's pretty straightforward and simple. First, consider making a list, and it's a particular list. I'm going to call it an out of integrity list. What do I mean by that? This isn't a list to make yourself wrong or to criticize yourself. It's a list of opportunities. All of us are out of integrity on a regular basis. In fact, don't ever think that you will ever be in integrity 100%. That is impossible. But it's things like showing up 5 minutes early to class rather than coming in right in time. It's making sure that you do all of your schoolwork. It's making sure that when you make a promise to a friend, you actually fulfill on that promise. But it's looking at all the places that you may not have returned a phone call or may not have returned an email, where you cut corners in some of the projects that you're working on, when you haven't shared what there is to share in a relationship. Write all of those down. The exercise is actually two things. Getting present to, there's lots of opportunity for me to practice being my word at the next level. And when you do that, lots of great things will begin to occur. And finally, there's real power in promise. Oftentimes, we look at promise like a burden, like a heavy, significant weight that we need to wear. It's not at all. A promise is simply a declaration that you're going to do something in the future. You're going to produce a result in the future. It's going to enhance a relationship, enhance your sports with your team, enhance your grades, enhance yourselves as leaders. But practice making promises. Start small if you need to. But the opportunity is in actually speaking that promise, working yourselves out to take the action to fulfill on it, and then being able to partake in the results of it. So, wrapping things up this morning, I can assure you, I do not have a PhD in anything. I'm a pretty straightforward guy. I haven't traveled all over the world. And I make lots and lots of mistakes. But there's one thing that I've learned above anything else, that your ability to succeed, to truly succeed in lots of different areas, starts with your relationship to your word, and your word exemplifying integrity. Thank you. Any questions I can answer about that or about Michigan State or Detroit Red Wing hockey?
You said you made lots of mistakes, and we're not always full of integrity. What is something we can do to
And your name?
Kent, usually.
Ken?
Kent.
Kent. Thanks, Ken. So Ken's question was, when we make messes, and I don't say it back to make sure I understand Ken. When we make messes, what can we do to actually get back into integrity and cleaning them up, right? So, first thing, if I've made a mess and I hide it, what's the consequence of me hiding it? What's a consequence? It'll come up later, almost all of the time. So the first step in remedying anything or cleaning up the mess is simply to acknowledge it. Raise your hand and say, I made a mess. Now, none of us want to do that because sometimes the messes we make aren't real pretty. The mess I made in that Ford example, that was literally almost verbatim how the conversation went. I had a great business opportunity staring me in the face, and I made a complete mess. What I did was actually acknowledge, by asking that question, how is this conversation going? I acknowledged the mess in the moment. Best thing we can do is acknowledge that mess. Second, get responsible for cleaning it up. It wasn't Mr. Smith's job to clean up my mess. Whose responsibility was it? Mine. So, take responsibility for cleaning it up. And third, recreate your promise. Just because I broke a promise today and made a mess doesn't mean I can't recreate a new version of that promise. Now, moving forward, guess what I need to do? Manage myself so that I actually fulfill on that promise. Because the one thing will happen, going back to us being our word, if I become known, not as Preston True, but as someone who consistently makes messes, then all of a sudden, lots and lots of people, even folks that I don't know, are going to start relating to me as the guy that makes messes versus who I really am. Thanks, Ken. Any other questions?
Can I ask you to connect dots, if you will, of the importance of integrity as it is in your life today? When you get out of school and you're in the workplace, that trust factor, the follow through on your promises, not only in your professional life, but in your personal life as well. If you could help bridge that gap and just emphasize the importance that you see every day.
So Mr. Doan asked to, if I can connect some dots between the idea of integrity and where all of you are in your life now, but what it means going forward. How do we use integrity moving forward out there? What's next for you outside of high school? Probably the easiest and most usable example is around time. All of you may not, I know all of you have lots of things going on. In fact, by a show of hands, who is not overwhelmed right now with stuff to do? Okay, that's usually how it goes. Who is overwhelmed with stuff to do? Good. Wonderful taking instruction. Connecting the dots around time. Time is one of the greatest places we can look. If you show up on time to class, the teacher is going to start relating to you as someone who is very, very reliable. If you show up on time to sports or to extracurricular activities, everybody that's involved with you is going to relate to you as someone who's very reliable. But with that reliability comes the credibility we mentioned not long ago. So there isn't, completely black and white, and it's not always the most clear example. In other words, I can't promise that everyone all across the board, everybody in Shrine, is going to know that you are absolutely reliable because you show up 5 minutes early to class. But there are little things like that. The whole idea of integrity is, it's not some great big ambiguous degree that you need to go out and go to school for. for a long time to get. They can actually start today. So, what's a promise that you make to mom and dad on occasion? Who's got an example? You just shout it out. Clean your room. So, if that's a promise you've got, one way to build trust, credibility, intimacy, reliability with mom and dad is actually clean your room when you're going to say you're going to clean your room. What's another example? What about in other relationships that you guys are in now? What about with friends? What are some promises you make to friends? You guys are good. We don't make any promises to friends. That's why we keep everything safe, right? That's terrific. When you get out there in the work, what's next? In college? What's next in life after college? Or let's say it this way, life after high school? You're likely going to be far more responsible for yourselves and managing yourselves than you ever have been in your life. Now, sometimes that's really, really scary. And the other way to look at it is it's an amazing opportunity when you have more control, you have more responsibility, you have more freedom to do what you want to do. But using the idea of keeping promises, of showing up on time or showing up when you say you're going to show up, of returning a phone call when you say you're going to return a phone call, of communicating something, even if it's bad news to someone, but communicating something that will support that relationship is going to have not only one person, but your whole community view you as someone who is a person of integrity. That's going to go miles and miles, certainly when it comes to college, and absolutely when it comes to career. More organizations, and this is not scientific study that I've done, but in my line of work, I meet lots of people, lots of companies. The primary reason people are let go from companies, either fired or dismissed in some way, shape, or form, aside from the occasional, very egregious things that someone might do, more often than not, it comes back to that person was just unreliable for keeping their word. And when they're unreliable for keeping their word, their job performance decline, their team's performance decline, and then obviously if that's going on, guess what? The whole organization's performance declines. And it starts with just one person, each one of us.
Yeah, I was just going to touch on that a little bit, but all the people that you meet with and you deal with, these are generally highly successful people and so forth, but what are some of the things that they're coming to you that they feel they need to work on?
So Mr. Smith's question was, in my line of work, what are some of the things that organizations and individuals are coming to me to work on, or to work with them on? Frequently, because most of my work is with organizations and businesses. Almost always they're underperforming in several different areas. Number one, their sales or revenue. So they're not bringing enough money in the door. Number two, their teams aren't producing effective results. In other words, if you've got an engineering team that's working on projects and they are overextending budgets or they're overextending time limits, that has a very significant impact. It's akin to all of you working on a school project together and consistently not bringing the project in the time frame. There's lots of different, what I'll call presenting issues. It might be we're not selling enough, our salespeople aren't producing enough, our managers aren't managing effectively enough, our leaders aren't leading effectively enough. And it's interesting because once we can get beyond what many people think is a complicated solution, once we can get past that mindset, we realize that keeping our word, that being a person of integrity, that keeping teams whole and complete, doing all our schoolwork, showing up at practice on time, communicating with friends the way they want to be communicated with, that actually makes huge changes for organizations in all of those areas, sales, management, and leadership. One more?
It's just a comment. I think leadership process never stops. It's just always on. You build that foundation, you build a lot of technical skills, you get a degree, you go to work, but oftentimes the difference between folks that are in middle management or in lower management and upper management, that all comes down to leadership skills. It's just something that never ever stops. That's why I think this program is so important. To grasp some of these concepts early on, and some of the speakers, in addition to yourself, that we've had, there's a message there that just keeps coming all the time, and I think it really resonates with the fact that it never a process that stops.
Whatever you guys do, thanks for being here this morning, and for every other Winner's Circle event. Do whatever you need to do to be here, to keep learning. As Mr. Smith was talking about, you get out there in life beyond high school, and it's probably the world's greatest classroom, greatest laboratory for you to continue learning. So, if there's any words of wisdom I'll share, and I'll be quiet. Be a sponge. Keep your word and be a sponge. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mr. True. Appreciate being here. Students, thank you also again for being here. And I want to encourage you to, each week that you come in, take a look at our